Our Call, the podcast where we delve into live theater, TV, film, basically entertainment in general. I'm your host, Rich Kless. Our guest today has been involved in theater education for 48 years. He has helped create school editions of many Broadway musicals, including Spamalot, The Addams Family, Big Fish, Bright Star, and most recently, The Prom. He's a member of the advisory board for Education Theater Association's Educational Theater Foundation, and in 2011, a recipient of the New York State Theater Education Association's Rod Marriott Award for Lifetime Achievement in Educational Theater. He is a 2024 inductee into the EDTA Hall of Fame. He has presented workshops throughout the U.S. and U.K., and in 2022 received the Florida Association for Theater Educators Outstanding Theater Arts Advocate Award. He's also the author of Your High School Improv Shows Playbook and Your School Theater Director's Playbook. He is currently the Executive Vice President for Educational and Community Initiatives at Theatrical Rights Worldwide. Please welcome Jim Hoare. Jim, thanks for joining me today.
Thanks, Rich.
Let me start off with the same question I've started off with everybody with. I want you to go back. What made you want to be an entertainer to begin with before you got into anything else?
I would say from when I was a very small child, I grew up in an arts environment, but theater and music were the two things I loved most. And I liked, more than performing, I liked accompanying. And although I did a lot of performing when I was in high school, well, in college, it occurred to me once along the way, I said, as an accompanist and a director, that's where I was most comfortable. I liked making other people look good, and I just got great joy from that.
Okay. So you were an educator in high school for many, many years, and then you made a transition to work with Theatrical Rights Worldwide. What's involved with going from the educator into theatrical rights and royalties and stuff like that?
So I was sort of lucky when I was when I was teaching on Long Island. I was lucky enough through random events to approach Steve Spiegel, who was at MTI at the time, which was the largest musicals licensing company at the time. And I said, do you ever need anybody to test new stuff? Actually, I very clearly remember it was a year when Pippin was first released, and we were doing Pippin along with 5 other schools in Nassau County.
Right.
And and I was looking for something a little off the beaten trail.
Mm-hmm.
So he said, sure, we're always looking for people to workshop stuff. And so we started by doing, I think we did Fame at some point, which
I was just going to mention, that was my first foray into it with you, was doing Fame.
Yeah, and we were finding out along the way that certain songs were not available. And it was an interesting experience. And it was a struggle. And it was okay. But the thing is, because we said yes to that, that led to, at one point, Steve said, well, send it to Jim. He'll try anything. So we got to try a few other things along the way. But ultimately, he called me one day and he said, I need a high school to do Les Mis. Do you have enough boys this year to pull that off? And I said, actually, that year I did, 95, 96. No, Les Mis, that was 95, 96 was Assassins, Stephen Sondheim's. And what we learned from that is Stephen Sondheim did not want a school edition of Assassins. Assassins is what it is. Do it or don't do it. But with Les Mis in 2001, we said, yeah, there can be a school edition. It requires shortening the show a bit and changing the keys of things like a song like Bring Him Home. No high school kid can really sing that in the key of A, so we brought it down to F. But making cuts, get it to 2:30. Because for high school theater, if you go past 2 hours and 30 minutes, you're in thin ice.
Right.
Most people can feel it. And when I was working on that, Cameron McIntosh gave me a great bit of advice. And he said, every musical should end 10 minutes before everybody wished it was over, and not 10 minutes after they wish you had stopped.
That's great. That's great.
So when 2006, Steve Spiegel called me and he said, I've always really wanted to start my own company. I got the funding to start my own licensing company, and I'd like to have a teacher on board to advise me what works best in the school environment. What's your problem? What doesn't? So we started in 2006, and we've been around ever since. So what I did with Les Mis and Assassins and Fame Now I do with authors of the musicals that we represent, being All Shook Up, Spamalot, Jersey Boys, um, Color
I,
Purple, Prom.
it's funny because I have a vivid memory of you opening up the script to Fame, and you looked at it and you were like, "This is the movie script. What the hell am I supposed to do with this?" I'm doing it on stage. I'm not doing it on film.
Right.
There was a moment of panic of like, okay, I get it. I get it.
Yep. Um, and were you there for Life After High School as well? Is there
Uh,
Life After?
you actually did that before I got there. That was
Okay.
prior to
And,
me.
and it was, again, with similar situation, but there was a very complicated book. And Glenn Pinnell, who was a student at the time,
Yeah,
he was able to find the fixes. And that's what again, I'm a strong believer that you don't go in as a director and say, this is my plan, you do it my way. It's let's unleash the creativity of the entire group,
right.
and it's
It's
going to work.
forcing you to become like again. I told you before we started. My wife and son are working on Hadestown locally, and part of the conditions of doing it is you can't use the same setting, and you have to use a
Right.
different setting. You have to use and it is great that they're smart enough because this one great show, and I just sit there and I go, why are you going to get a high school kid to be Patrick Page? I mean, that voice. I mean, it's just not going to happen. And the deal is, don't try. Because
Exactly right.
you're not going to get a 15-year-old to be Patrick Page. It's not going to happen.
That is exactly right. I'm curious, did they change the key of Hades songs?
They did, although the kid they got is actually really good. He's actually a bass. He's not that gravelly Page bass, but he is a bass baritone. So he's doing a real nice job with it. From what I went to a dress rehearsal last week just to kind of see what was going on. I actually directed a show from them. I did Secret Garden about 5 years ago. I directed for them as well. And which is another show that's just, an adult show, definitely. And you have to find, those places to make it right instead of trying to
Yeah.
make it true to what they did on Broadway, because it's never going to happen, you know?
Right. Yeah.
So,
And there are certain shows that are just really hard to do.
right, right.
Um, I'm glad I did them, but I don't know that I do them twice. Mystery of Edwin Drood to be one of those,
Yeah. I,
which,
I agree to actually, I did do Druid again after high school, but only one time and in a different role. But yes, it's a ridiculously hard show for the newer actor to do, in my opinion.
especially if you're going to do it correctly and memorize all of the endings and all
Right,
of the lovers,
right.
which we did.
I was gonna say
Um,
I did anyway. I could tell you some of my classmates, not necessarily have it all.
no, yes, I won't say who, but there was one person I said, "Oh, please don't make him the murderer," and he never was, so that was good. Um,
Yeah,
but
I know exactly what you're talking about. No
and
name.
then oddly enough, it was funny. In my job here, I've met teachers from all over the country, so I go to theater conferences and meet people and work with schools that are testing our stuff. And I've now since become very good friends with a man named Frank Bluestein, who was in Germantown, Tennessee, who, while we were doing Mystery of Edwin Drood, was the second school simultaneously doing the first high school production of Mystery of Edwin Drood.
Okay.
And we have since become good friends.
So let me ask you this back up a little bit. What's the process for creating a school edition? How does it work? I mean, you get the rights obviously from the authors. Is that how that happens first, that you're allowed to release them?
Yes. When we sign our representation agreement with the authors for a Broadway show, um, we have the right to adapt it for school. But of course, the authors, shows are always the intellectual property of the authors. And it's really a licensing company's primary job not to just license the show to schools and theaters, but to protect the integrity of the author's work.
Right.
So sadly, sometimes we actually have to send cease and desists when we gotta somebody will rat out someone saying the person has just rewritten the end of the show or whatever. Um, but the goal is for a show to be done by schools, and I'll give you Spamalot as an example because I love
Mm.
Spamalot when I first saw it on Broadway, and when Eric Idle and company decided that TRW was going to be the home for Spamalot, I said, we have two problems with Spamalot for schools.
Hmm.
And Eric Idle said, well, what's the problems? And I said, well, number one, it's too male heavy. Like there's not a lot for the girls to do. And he said, well, that's not really true. There are only four roles where the gender must be male:
Hmm.
King Arthur, Sir Lancelot, Prince Herbert,
Hmm.
and Herbert's father.
Right.
He said the rest of the roles are people, whether they're girls playing boys, or in the case of like Dennis's mother, normally played by a guy. When Hicksville High School did it, it was a football player who did Dennis's mother with a beard, and he got great laughs. Um, but he said the parts could be girls playing girls or girls playing boys. I said, "All right, that's good." I said, "Let's write that down so the teachers know." And I said, "The other thing is, Spamalot's not dirty; it's naughty."
Yeah.
And he said, "Well, what's naughty about it?" And I said, "Well, like the word shit. Life's a piece of shit when you think of it." And he said, "What's wrong with shit? Shit is shit." And I said, "No, not in America."
Right. Maybe in
I
England, but
said,
not
"It's
here.
a curse word here." And he says, "Oh, so you're telling me American children don't read the word shit or say the word shit?" I said, "No, they say it all the time." And I said, "Look, we does not even have this argument. I'm telling you, there are certain schools, certainly down where you live, where they wouldn't do it if it was in the script."
Right. It's
So
your
he said, "Is
possibility.
dung okay in America?" And I said, "Yes, dung is fine."
In
So basically, it's a matter of taking F-bombs and other vulgarities and just slightly rewording them or giving teachers an option. Like,
right.
you know, at our school, we could have said it. And certainly a lot of schools in New York, California, and other places, they can. So we give teachers the option. Um, in the case of the prom, we
Right.
took out harsh language because really the prom is loosely based on a true story
Hmm.
that took place, in 2010.
Right.
And so the author said, we don't want a principal or a school board member to say, "Oh, you have the word, goddamn or something in the script, so you can't do the show." He said, take out all those words so that they have to say, "Oh, we don't want to see two girls going to the prom together. That's the only reason you can't do the show."
Right.
And most principals won't say that. Um, so it's working with the authors to keep the integrity of the piece and keep the whole full length piece. The school edition is the full length. It's not like the junior version. The junior version is a 60-minute middle school adaptation.
Right. Right.
That's different. But the high school edition, my biggest challenge was we just worked with Stepanak High School last year in Westchester County.
Okay.
They did Jersey Boys
Oh, okay.
without a single F bomb.
Well, that's
Um,
a change.
so working with the authors to create the alternative version with
Right.
other expletives that are more acceptable.
Right.
Um, but they did a fabulous job. In fact, the boy that played Frankie Valli made it to the Jimmy Awards.
Oh, okay.
Um, so that's what school editions are. We want schools to do the show. We want the show to stay in, for example, in Spamalot, a teacher said to me once, my choir director wants Prince Herbert to be a girl so that Lancelot is in love with a girl, so he's not gay. That's non-negotiable. Eric Idle said no. It's part of the plot.
Right.
And it's very funny laugh at the very end when King Arthur marries the Lady of the Lake and Lancelot and Herbert walk down arm in arm, and Lancelot looks at Herbert and says, "Just think, in 1,000 years, this will still be controversial." And it gets a laugh every year, every night. So
So, are you also, in addition to creating these, you're also representing the authors most of the time in keeping the integrity of their work whole, not just in the school editions, but in any edition at all.
correct,
That's correct. Part of what TRW does. Is that correct?
correct. Yes.
And how and give me some examples of places. Is it mostly just places going rogue a lot and trying to get away with stuff, or are there other
E-
instances where they'll actually ask you and you got to go, no, I'll check with the author, but no.
They ask us for most, I mean, authors want to see their stuff done. They just don't want to see their stuff rewritten.
Right.
Andrew Lippa, who wrote The Addams Family and Big Fish, he went with me to a teachers conference once, and someone said, "We're going to start working on Addams Family. Do you have any advice?" And Andrew said, "On behalf of all the authors, I have this one bit of advice. Please do the show that I wrote."
Right.
We worked for many years to get it where it is now. Like even with The Addams Family, when it was on Broadway, they continued to rewrite it. They thought that it should be a bigger ensemble piece. so that when the show went out on tour, it was a different script. Four songs from the Broadway production were cut before the tour, and Andrew Lipper and John August, they did four new songs and new scenes.
Yeah.
And obviously it works because it's been performed all over the country.
It is amazing because I was never very big on being an author or anything like that. I have done it. The last time I did it was in, I want to say, in the late 90s. We had a children's theater company in Wilmington when we lived in Wilmington, and we
Oh
performed
yeah.
all kinds of educational theater. And we noticed mostly from was TheaterWorks USA stuff and Prince Street Players and that kind of stuff. And we noticed we going through our repertoire of all these shows, we'd been doing it for like 5 years. And I finally said, you know what? There's no good version of Rumpelstiltskin anywhere. So a friend of mine and I sat down, and he was a musician and he wrote all the music, and I wrote the book for it. And which was, again, it was and I will honestly say, after I did that, when we got into rehearsals, the actors who were like, "Oh, well, I want to change," and I was like, "No, I worked my butt off." Right. How many times I rewrote the scene? Do what I said.
Yes.
There's a reason it
And
goes that way.
and like with the Monty Python stuff, that they would do all kinds of workshop things before they got to their TV show. But the TV show, there was no improvisation at all. The
Right.
script is the script. So when Eric Idle had his book signing, he wrote a book. Well, he had two. The most recent one was the Spamalot Diaries, but he wrote an autobiography. He called it a sort of biography because he didn't want to include any really negative stories about anything. He wanted to include his happy memories of all the people he's worked with in his life. And I met David Hyde Pierce at his book signing. So I
Oh,
was asking him about the original um, cast, and he said, "I'll tell you a great bit of advice, and you can share this with directors." He said, "The first day we had our first table read for Spamalot, I looked around the table, and Hank Azaria and Tim Curry and all of these famous, wonderful comedian and Mike Nichols, who Eric Idle really praises in his second book, The Spamalot Diaries." He said, Mike and Nichols said to everybody, "All right, look around this table. Look who's sitting here right now.
right, right,
Now, I have one thing to tell you all. You're not funny. The
right,
material is funny.
right,
Your job is to trust the material."
right,
And it's true. Like if King Arthur thought it was silly that there were coconuts being his horse,
right,
then it wouldn't be funny for us in the audience. But the fact that he took it so seriously
right.
is what made it so fun for us.
I don't think I've ever told
So
you this story. When I was still living in New York and I worked at Westbury Music Fair, we did The Odd Couple with Tim Conway and Tom Poston. Now that's two straight men clashing. There's no
yeah,
funny man and straight man. And it was opened up at Westbury Music Fair, and I traveled with it to Valley Forge Music Fair after that, doing props on it or something. So I was a little bit involved with it, and it was hysterical. It was very funny because the two of them are geniuses. But at the opening night cast party, Neil Simon, his toast was, "Great show. Wish I wrote it."
oh no, he was notorious for not wanting people to change things.
He was kind of he played it off well at the cast party, but like he was just like, because I mean he was not wrong. Conway and Don Poe, they just the card players, the easiest job in the world as an actor, because the card players just stood there
Yeah,
holding cards laughing. That's what they did the whole time, and then walked off the stage. But it was the two of them just taking more of a suggestion of a scene. Here's two guys who are divorced, living together, go, and
right.
make something up different every single night. Um, but it was very funny that Neil Simon said that. I was like, oh no.
Oh
And I can honestly say that after he said that, it got a little tighter, but
yes.
not much. So, all right. We're going to say that's the first part of this episode with Jim Hoare of Theatrical Rights Worldwide. Please join us again next week for part two of this episode. If you like what you hear, please hit follow or subscribe. And also, if you have any suggestions of anyone you'd like to hear from on our podcast, please feel free to email me at 2psproductions@gmail.com. And we will see you next week, and keep the faith.